Caleb Thornton's hand trembled as his daughter tugged his coat sleeve. Across the frozen market street, a boy sat barefoot in the snow ribs, showing through a torn shirt, eyes hollow as grave dirt. The merchant swept his broom inches from the child's face without looking down. "Papa!" Lucy's voice cracked. "Can we buy that boy?" The words hit Caleb like a bullet to the chest. 6 years old, and she'd just asked the question that would change everything. If you've ever seen someone the world forgot, stay with me. Watch this story unfold to the very end. Hit subscribe and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The question hung in the frozen air like smoke from a pistol. Caleb couldn't breathe. Around them, the December market kept moving, merchants hollering prices, children chasing each other through the stalls, the smell of roasted chestnuts mixing with wood smoke. But all of it faded to nothing. Lucy tugged his hand again. "Papa, did you hear me?" "I heard you, sweetheart." He looked down at her face, so earnest, so confused by his silence. She was 6 years old. She'd seen a broken thing and wanted to fix it, same as she did with every wounded bird and stray cat that wandered onto their land. In her world, hurt things could be helped. Caleb looked across the street again. The boy hadn't moved. He sat against a wooden post, knees drawn to his chest, wearing trousers 3 sizes too big, held up with rope. His shirt was so thin Caleb could count his ribs from 20 feet away. No coat, no shoes. Bare feet in the snow. A woman in a fine wool coat stepped over the boy's legs without breaking stride. Didn't even glance down. "Papa!" Lucy's grip tightened. "He's cold." "I know." "Then why ain't nobody helping him?" Caleb had spent 5 years teaching his daughter that the world was hard, that people had to be harder to survive it. He'd taught her to read weather in the sky, to track animals by their prints, to understand that sentiment was a luxury these mountains rarely afforded. His wife Clara had softened those lessons with gentleness. But Clara had been in the ground for 2 years now, taken by fever in the dead of winter. Since then, Caleb had doubled down on the hard truths. You couldn't save everyone. Trying would only break your heart. But standing in that market, watching his daughter stare at that forgotten child, something cracked open in Caleb's chest. Something he'd kept sealed since the day they'd lowered Clara into frozen earth. "Stay here," he said quietly. Lucy's eyes went wide. "You're gonna help him. I'm gonna ask if he's hungry." It wasn't the same thing, but it was something. Caleb crossed the street with long strides, boots crunching through snow and half-frozen mud. Up close, the boy looked worse. His lips had a faint blue tinge. His hands clasped around his shins showed knuckles scraped raw. But his eyes, dark brown and sharp, tracked Caleb's approach with the wary intelligence of something that had learned to expect pain. Caleb crouched down slow. He'd gentled enough wild animals to know the posture of fear. "You got a name, son?" The boy didn't answer right away. His gaze flicked past Caleb to the crowd, checking for threats, escape routes. "Jesse," he finally said, voice barely audible. "Jesse." Caleb nodded. "I'm Caleb. That's my daughter Lucy over there." He gestured toward the shop window where Lucy stood pressed against the glass, watching with fierce attention. "She thinks you might be hungry. Are you—" The boy's jaw tightened. Pride even now. Caleb recognized it. Same pride that had kept him from accepting charity when he'd first come to these mountains young and stupid and convinced he could conquer the wilderness through stubbornness alone. "When's the last time you ate?" Caleb asked. Gentler now. Jesse's resistance crumbled. His shoulders sagged. 2 days, maybe 3. Something hot kindled in Caleb's gut. Not anger at the boy, anger at every person who'd walked past this child and decided he wasn't their problem. "Come on." Caleb stood and extended his hand. "There's a food stall around the corner. We'll get something hot in you." Jesse didn't move. "I got no money." "Didn't ask if you did." "Why?" The word came out raw, suspicious. "Why would you help me?" "Because my daughter asked me to." Caleb kept his hand extended. "Come on, Jesse. Too damn cold to be sitting on the ground." For a long moment the boy just stared at Caleb's palm. Then slowly, he uncurled from his defensive crouch and placed his small, filthy hand in Caleb's larger one. The touch sent a jolt through him. The boy's skin was ice cold, so thin Caleb could feel every delicate bone. Lucy appeared at his elbow before they'd taken 3 steps. She studied Jesse with open curiosity, no hint of disgust or pity. "I'm Lucy," she announced. "You're real dirty." "Lucy." "It's okay." Jesse's voice was quiet. "I know I am." "We can fix that," Lucy decided. "Papa's real good at fixing things." They made their way through the market to Agnes McAllister's stall. The broad-shouldered widow sold meat pies and stew from a great iron pot over coal fire. The smell alone made Jesse sway on his feet. Caleb steadied him with a hand on his shoulder. Felt the ridge of his shoulder blade through that thin shirt. 3 bowls, Caleb told Agnes, fishing coins from his pocket. And bread. Agnes looked at Jesse. Something in her weathered face softened. "Cold night," she said simply, and ladled portions generous even by her standards. Added extra bread without charging. They sat on a bench near her fire, Jesse between Caleb and Lucy. The boy held the bowl in both hands, warming his fingers before he started eating. When he finally took that first spoonful, he had to stop himself from gulping it down. Caleb could see the effort it took. "Easy," Caleb murmured. "It ain't going anywhere." Lucy ate her own stew while studying Jesse with the frank assessment of childhood. "Where's your mama and papa?" Caleb winced. "Lucy, that's not easy. Dead." Jesse said it flat. "Mine accident. 2 years back. Both of them at once." The matter-of-fact delivery made it worse somehow. Caleb knew about mine accidents, cave-ins, bad air, explosions from gas pockets. Common enough in territory where copper and silver drew men desperate enough to risk their lives in the dark. Most mining outfits didn't bother with safety. Workers were cheap. Orphans were cheaper. "I'm sorry," Caleb said. "Meant it." Jesse shrugged, a gesture that tried for indifference but didn't land. "Was a while ago." "Where you been staying since?" "Around." The boy spooned up more stew, eyes fixed on his bowl. "Worked at the mine for a bit, hauling slag, got sick, couldn't work no more, been in town since spring." 6 months on the street, maybe more. Caleb looked at Jesse's face in the firelight and revised his estimate. The boy was probably older than he looked, maybe 10, just starved down to nothing. Lucy had gone quiet. When Caleb glanced at her, she was staring at Jesse with an expression that reminded him painfully of Clara. That same fierce, protective love his wife had shown every wounded creature she'd ever found. "You can't sleep outside tonight," Lucy said. "You'll freeze." "I got a place." Jesse's tone said otherwise. "Where? Under the mill bridge. Stays dry there." "That ain't a place." Lucy's voice rose. "That's just outside." "Lucy." Caleb's voice carried a warning. He could see where this was heading. Every practical bone in his body screamed at him to stop it. He had his own daughter to think about, his own survival to ensure. Winter in these mountains was brutal enough without taking on extra mouths to feed. He'd worked hard to build a life that was stable and safe. Inviting trouble in the form of a starving street child was the opposite of wise. But Lucy turned to him with Clara's eyes gray-blue, like storm clouds, and asked the question he'd been dreading. "Can he come home with us, just for tonight?" "Lucy, we can't just tonight." She repeated. "Please, Papa. He'll die if he sleeps under that bridge." She wasn't wrong. Temperature was already dropping as the sun sank behind the peaks. By midnight, it'd be well below freezing. By dawn, anyone without shelter might not wake up at all. Caleb looked at Jesse. The boy had set down his bowl and was watching this exchange with a carefully blank expression, like he'd learned not to hope for things. That look decided it. One night, Caleb said, watched Jesse's eyes widen in disbelief. "You'll sleep in the barn where it's warm. You'll get a decent meal. Tomorrow we figure out something more permanent. Understood?" Jesse nodded, speechless. Lucy threw her arms around Caleb's neck. "Thank you, Papa." He hugged her back, breathing in the scent of her hair, wood smoke, and pine soap. Over her shoulder, he met Jesse's gaze and saw something there he recognized. The desperate gratitude of someone who'd been drowning and just felt solid ground under their feet for the first time in months. "Finish your stew," Caleb said gruffly. "Long ride home." They left town as the market lanterns were being snuffed one by one. Caleb's horse Bess, a sturdy bay mare, carried all three of them, Caleb in the saddle, Lucy in front, and Jesse perched behind, clinging to Caleb's coat with thin fingers. The boy was so light, Caleb barely felt the extra weight. The trail home climbed into the foothills, following a creek that'd be frozen solid by January. Pines pressed close on either side, branches heavy with snow that glowed pale in the rising moonlight. Caleb had chosen this land for its isolation. 15 miles from town. One narrow trail that discouraged visitors. After Clara died, the solitude had been a blessing. Now carrying a strange child home in the dark, he wondered if he'd made a mistake letting himself care. Lucy had fallen asleep against his chest. Behind him, Jesse was still awake. Caleb could feel the tension in the boy's grip. "How far?" Jesse asked quietly. "Another hour." Silence. Then, "Why are you helping me?" Fair question. Caleb considered several answers before settling on the truth. "My daughter asked me to." "That's it." "That's enough." More silence. The trail switchbacked up a steep section. Bess picked her way carefully over rocks hidden beneath the snow. "I won't steal nothing," Jesse said finally. "And I can work. I'm stronger than I look." The desperate edge in his voice made Caleb's chest tighten. "I know you won't steal. And you ain't here to work. You're here because no child should sleep under a bridge in winter." "I ain't a child. I'm almost 11. "That's still a child." Jesse went quiet again. Caleb could feel him thinking, trying to figure out the angle, the catch. In his experience, nobody did anything without wanting something in return. Caleb understood that logic. He'd learned it himself before Clara taught him that kindness didn't always come with strings. The cabin appeared as they crested the final ridge. Solid logs, stone chimney smoke rising thin against the stars. Lamplight glowed in the window, left burning to guide them home. Behind the cabin stood the barn. Beyond that, the chicken coop and smokehouse. It wasn't much, but Caleb had built it with his own hands. Every log cut and placed with care. It represented safety, stability, everything he'd tried to create for Lucy after Clara's death. Bringing Jesse here felt like opening a door he'd kept locked for good reason. But the decision was made. He dismounted and lifted Lucy down, still sleeping, then helped Jesse slide off. The boy's legs nearly buckled when his bare feet hit the snow. "Jesus." Caleb scooped Jesse up before he could protest, carried him toward the cabin with Lucy over his other shoulder. Jesse was stiff in his arms, unused to being held, but too cold and exhausted to fight it. Inside, the fire had burned to coals. Caleb laid Jesse on the rag rug before the hearth and went to stir up the flames. Lucy woke enough to stumble to her bed in the loft, murmuring sleepy goodnights. Fresh wood caught. Fire blazed up, throwing warm light across the cabin's single room. Jesse sat huddled on the rug, looking around with wide eyes. The table and chairs. Shelves of supplies. Clara's rocking chair in the corner. The ladder to Lucy's loft. "You hungry again?" Caleb asked. Jesse shook his head, but his eyes lingered on the bread and cheese on the table. "Don't lie to me, son. If you're hungry, say so." The boy's defenses crumbled. "Yes, sir." Caleb cut thick slices of bread and cheese, poured 2 cups of milk. They ate in silence. Jesse still watching Caleb like he expected to be thrown back into the cold any second. When the food was gone, Caleb fetched a wooden tub from the corner, started hauling water from the kettle over the fire. Jesse watched with growing alarm. "What's that for?" "You." "I don't need—" That wasn't a question. Caleb softened his tone when he saw genuine fear flash across the boy's face. "Look, I ain't gonna hurt you, but you can't sleep in my barn covered in half the street dirt in town. You'll get clean, you'll get warm, and then you'll sleep. Understood?" Jesse nodded slowly. When the tub was full, Caleb set soap and a rag beside it, turned his back to give the boy privacy. Behind him, hesitant sounds of Jesse stripping off filthy clothes, climbing into the water, a sharp intake of breath. "It's hot." "That's the idea." Caleb busied himself banking the fire for the night. Tried not to think about the last time he'd filled that tub for Clara near the end, when she'd been too weak to manage it herself. He pushed the memory down. Grief was a luxury. He'd learned to ration it. When he finally turned around, Jesse was sitting in the tub with his arms wrapped around his knees. Soap suds floating on the water. Clean. The boy looked even younger, all sharp angles and pale skin, dark hair plastered to his skull. But his eyes still held that same weary intelligence. "There's bruises." Caleb kept his voice quiet. He'd seen them when Jesse climbed in. Purple and yellow marks across his ribs. A darker one on his shoulder blade. From before. Jesse didn't look up. "They're old." "Who hit you?" The boy's jaw tightened. "Don't matter now." Caleb wanted to press, but he recognized that same stubborn privacy he'd seen in his own mirror for years. Instead, he fetched clean clothes from his trunk, a flannel shirt that would hang to Jesse's knees, wool socks. "Get dried off. Put these on." Jesse climbed out and dried himself with shaking hands. The bruises looked worse in the firelight, evidence of casual cruelty that made Caleb's anger burn cold and steady. He said nothing, just watched as Jesse pulled on the shirt. The boy disappeared inside the fabric sleeves, hanging past his fingertips. "Come on." Caleb grabbed a lantern and an armful of blankets. "Barn's warmer than you'd think." Bess nickered a greeting from her stall as they entered. The air inside was cold, but still protected from the wind heavy with the smell of hay and horse. Caleb climbed into the hayloft and spread blankets over the loose hay, created a nest that would trap heat. Jesse followed slowly, still moving like something might attack him. "This is for me." The boy stared at the makeshift bed. "Unless you'd rather sleep standing up." Jesse knelt, ran his hand over the blanket. Wonder spread across his face. "It's soft." Something in Caleb's chest cracked a little wider. "Get in before the heat escapes." Jesse burrowed under the blankets fully clothed, curled on his side knees drawn up, looked at Caleb with an expression trying very hard not to be hopeful. "You'll really let me stay till morning?" "Said I would." And then what? Caleb had been asking himself the same question for hours. The smart thing would be to take Jesse back to town in the morning. Find the church maybe. One of the charitable societies. Someone else's problem. But looking at this child, still half convinced this was a dream he'd wake from cold and hungry, under that bridge, Caleb couldn't make himself say it. "We'll figure it out," he said instead. "For now, just sleep." He climbed down from the loft, taking the lantern, but leaving Jesse in darkness, softened by moonlight through the barn walls. At the door, he paused, looked back. All he could see was a small mound of blankets and one thin arm flung out across the hay. One night, Caleb reminded himself. Just one night. But walking back to the cabin under stars brilliant enough to cut, he had the sinking feeling that one night was going to turn into something much more complicated. Inside, he stoked the fire. Stood for a long time staring into the flames. Memories rose unbidden. Another boy, younger than Jesse, laughing as they explored these same mountains. His brother, Josiah, 14 years old, fearless and wild and convinced he was invincible, right up until he wasn't. The search had lasted 4 days. They'd found Josiah's body at the base of a cliff, neck broken from the fall. Caleb had been 18. Old enough to be responsible, people said. Old enough to have watched his brother better. That was 20 years ago. But the wound had never healed right. He'd learned to live with it the way you lived with a badly set bone. It worked well enough, but it ached in cold weather. Maybe that's why Lucy's question had hit him so hard. Maybe that's why he'd looked at Jesse and seen Josiah. Not the physical resemblance, but the essence of a child the world had decided wasn't worth saving. Caleb climbed into his bed, pulled the quilts up. Through the window he could just make out the dark shape of the barn against the snow. Somewhere inside, a boy who'd been invisible that morning was sleeping warm and fed. One night, Caleb told himself again. But even as he closed his eyes, he knew he was lying. Some doors once opened couldn't be closed again. Dawn broke cold and clear over the mountains. Light spilled across the snow in shades of pink and gold. Caleb woke to silence, that particular quiet of winter mornings when the world held its breath. He lay still, watching frost patterns on the window glass. Then remembered the boy in the barn. He dressed quickly, built up the fire, set the coffee pot on to boil before stepping outside. The cold hit like a fist. His boots crunched through snow as he crossed to the barn. Morning light turned everything sharp-edged and crystalline. Inside, Bess nickered softly. From the loft, no sound at all. Caleb climbed the ladder with his heart in his throat, half expecting to find the blankets empty. The boy fled in the night. But Jesse was still there. Curled so tight under the covers, only the top of his dark hair showed. Breathing deep and even. Real sleep. Maybe the first he'd had in months. Caleb stood watching for a moment, then climbed back down. He'd let the boy rest. God knew he needed it. Back in the cabin, he started breakfast. Bacon in the skillet, biscuits in the Dutch oven. Familiar motions that settled his thoughts. Lucy climbed down from the loft as the bacon started sizzling, still in her nightgown, hair tangled from sleep. "Is he still here?" First words out of her mouth. In the barn, sleeping. Relief flooded her face. "I thought maybe he was a dream." "He's real enough." Caleb flipped the bacon. "But Lucy, we need to talk about what happens next." She sat at the table, bare feet swinging. "He should stay with us." "It ain't that simple." "Why not?" "Because I don't know how to take care of a damaged child," Caleb thought. "Because I barely kept you alive after your mother died. Because I'm terrified I'll fail him the way I failed Josiah." But he said, "Because he ain't ours. Someone might be looking for him." "Who his mama and papa are dead." "Maybe other family, aunts, uncles." Lucy's expression turned stubborn. Clara's stubbornness, which had been formidable. If he had someone, he wouldn't have been sleeping under a bridge. She wasn't wrong. Caleb plated the bacon and pulled biscuits from the coals. "Go get dressed, then wake him up. Tell him breakfast is ready." Lucy scrambled up the ladder. Caleb stood at the window, coffee cup warming his hands. The smart thing would be to take Jesse back to town today. Find the sheriff. Ask around. Locate whatever mining company had employed the boy's parents. There were procedures for orphans. Institutions that handled such things. But the thought of those institutions' stories he'd heard of children worked like animals, beaten for small infractions, discarded when inconvenient, made his stomach turn. Lucy reappeared in wool pants and a sweater, hair hastily braided. She pulled on her coat and ran to the barn. Through the window, Caleb watched her small figure disappear through the barn door. Minutes passed. Then Lucy emerged with Jesse beside her. The boy still wore Caleb's oversized shirt and socks. He looked lost, uncertain. They crossed the yard together, Lucy chattering, while Jesse listened with careful attention, like he wasn't used to anyone talking to him at all. They came inside, bringing cold air and the smell of hay. Jesse stopped just past the threshold. taking in the cabin in daylight. The sturdy table, the shelves of supplies, the fire crackling in the hearth. His eyes landed on the food, widened. "Sit," Caleb said. "Both of you." They sat. Caleb loaded plates with bacon and biscuits, added butter and honey, poured milk for the children, coffee for himself. Jesse stared at his plate like he couldn't believe it was real. "Eat before it gets cold." The boy picked up a biscuit with both hands, bit into it, closed his eyes. A small sound escaped him. Not quite a sob, but close. Caleb looked away, gave him privacy for that moment of overwhelming gratitude. They ate in silence for a while. Lucy kept sneaking glances at Jesse, clearly bursting with questions, but holding back. Finally, she couldn't contain herself. "Do you know how to read?" Jesse shook his head. "Never learned." "I can teach you. Mama taught me, and then she taught Papa to teach me more after—" She stopped abruptly, looked at Caleb. "After your mama died," Caleb finished quietly. "It's all right to say it, Lucy." She nodded, turned back to Jesse with renewed determination. "I'm real good at teaching. I taught our chickens their names." Despite everything, Jesse's mouth twitched. "Chickens don't know their names. Ours do. Penny Henrietta and Duchess Jr. You named a chicken after the horse? She's got the same color feathers." This time Jesse did smile. Just a flash before he caught himself. But it was enough to transform his face from haunted to something closer to the child he should have been. Caleb cleared his throat. "Jesse, I need to ask you some questions about before." The smile vanished. The boy's shoulders tensed. "What kind of questions? About your folks, what mine they worked for, whether you got family anywhere who might be wondering where you are." Jesse's hands tightened on his fork. "Ain't nobody wondering." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've been gone 6 months and nobody came looking." The words were flat. "My pa worked for Blackrock Mining up near Silver Ridge. When him and Ma died, the company man said I could work in the pit or get out. I worked for a while, but then I got sick. Couldn't breathe right in all that dust." His voice stayed even, matter of fact. "They turned me out, said I was useless." Caleb felt anger kindle in his chest again. "What about your ma's people? Your pa's—" "Ma was from back east somewhere, never talked about family." Jesse met Caleb's eyes directly. "Pa's folks died before I was born, far as I know anyway." He paused. "There ain't nobody. It's just me." The simple declaration hung in the air. Just me. Like he'd already accepted the fundamental loneliness of his existence. Like he didn't expect anything different. Lucy reached across the table, put her small hand on Jesse's. "It ain't just you anymore. You got us now." Jesse pulled his hand back gently. "Your pa didn't say I could stay," he said one night. "But that was before—" "Before what?" Jesse's voice was soft but firm. "Before you decided you liked me. That don't change what's real. Your pa's got his own family to worry about. I understand that." The maturity in his tone was wrong for a child his age. It made Caleb think of soldiers he'd known, men who'd seen too much and come back changed. Jesse had that same quality. Someone who'd learned hard lessons too young. Caleb stood abruptly. Chair scraped against the floor. Both children looked up at him, startled. "I need to think," he said. Lucy helped Jesse find something better to wear. "Check the trunk in the loft, might be some of my old things that'll fit better." He grabbed his coat and hat. "Jesse, after breakfast you can help me with morning chores. We'll talk more later." He went outside before either could respond. The cold air cleared his head, but it didn't solve the fundamental problem. What the hell was he supposed to do with this boy? The smart choice was clear. Take Jesse to town, hand him over to someone official, walk away. Caleb had chosen isolation for a reason. To protect himself. To protect Lucy from more loss. Getting attached to a strange child was asking for trouble. But he kept seeing Jesse's face when Lucy said, "You got us now." That flash of desperate hope before the boy locked it down. That flat statement, "It's just me." Caleb crossed to the woodpile, started splitting logs with more force than necessary. The axe bit deep into pine. The crack of splitting wood echoed across the valley. Physical labor helped. It always had. When thoughts got too tangled, you worked until your body was too tired to support the weight of thinking. He was halfway through the pile when the cabin door opened. Jesse emerged, changed into a shirt, still too big, but at least didn't hang to his knees. Pants held up with suspenders. He moved carefully and borrowed boots. "Lucy said you might need help." His voice was quiet, uncertain. Caleb straightened, wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cold. "You know how to stack wood?" "Yes, sir." "Then stack these by the cabin door. We'll bring them inside later." They worked in silence. Caleb splitting, Jesse stacking. The boy moved efficiently despite his thin frame clearly familiar with physical labor. His hands were steady on the wood, and he built the stack with care. After a while, Caleb set down the axe. "How old were you when your folks died?" Jesse didn't pause in his stacking. 9, almost 10. "And the mine just put you to work. No questions. Lots of kids work the mines. They like us." His tone was matter-of-fact. "We're small enough to fit in the tight spaces. Don't ask for much pay." Jesse placed another log on the stack. "Wasn't so bad at first, but the dust gets in your lungs, makes you cough till you can't breathe." Caleb's hands clenched. He'd heard stories about the mines, men and children working in conditions that would make hell seem comfortable. But hearing it from this boy who'd lived it made it real in a way stories never could. "That why you left?" "Didn't leave. Got thrown out." Jesse's voice stayed even. "When you can't work, you're just using resources. Company man made that real clear. This company man, he got a name." Something flickered across Jesse's face. Fear, maybe, or something darker. "Why?" "Because I'd like to have a conversation with anyone who thinks it's acceptable to throw a child out in the street." "Wouldn't matter." Jesse shook his head. "They got dozens more kids where I came from. I ain't special." His voice was steady, but his hands had stilled on the wood. "Even if you talked to him, even if you got angry, it wouldn't change nothing. That's just how things are." "Don't mean they should be." Jesse looked up at him then. Really looked. "You really mean that?" "I do." "Why?" The boy's voice cracked. "You don't know me. I could be lying about all of it." "Are you?" "No." The word came out fierce. "I don't lie. My ma taught me better than that." "Then I believe you." Caleb picked up the axe again. "And believing you means I'm angry as hell about what happened to you. That's just how it is." They went back to work. But something had shifted. Jesse's movements were less guarded, his shoulders not quite so tense. When they finished with the wood, Caleb led him to the barn to tend the animals. Bess greeted them with a soft nicker. Jesse approached her cautiously, one hand extended. The mare sniffed his palm, then allowed him to stroke her neck. "She likes you," Caleb observed. "I like horses." A ghost of a smile crossed Jesse's face. "We had one before, old plow horse named Duke. Pa used to let me ride him sometimes, just around the yard." The smile faded, but it felt like flying. "You want to learn to ride proper." The boy's head whipped around. "What? Really? Useful skill up here, if you're going to—" Caleb stopped, the words catching in his throat. "If you're going to stay." That's what he'd been about to say. Jesse's eyes widened. "You mean it? You'd teach me?" Caleb ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. He was making promises he hadn't decided to keep, giving this boy hope that might end in disappointment. But looking at Jesse's face lit up with something that looked almost like joy, he couldn't bring himself to take it back. "Yeah," he said finally. "I'd teach you." They finished the barn chores together, feeding Bess, checking the chickens, hauling water. Jesse worked without complaint, quick to understand what needed doing, careful to do it right. He had good instincts, Caleb noticed, a willingness to work hard that spoke to his upbringing. His parents might have been poor, but they'd taught him the value of honest labor. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was fully up. Temperature had climbed slightly. Lucy met them at the door, practically vibrating. "Can we show Jesse the creek?" "Please, Papa. I want to show him where we catch fish in summer." Caleb hesitated. He needed to make a decision about the boy. Today. Before it got any harder. But Lucy was looking at him with such hope. And Jesse was standing there trying so hard not to care one way or another. "All right," Caleb heard himself say. "But stay close to the cabin. Don't go near the ice. It ain't thick enough to hold weight yet." They bundled up in coats and scarves, headed out following the trail down to the creek. Caleb stayed back, let them walk ahead, watched as Lucy chattered and Jesse listened with that same careful attention. The boy asked questions occasionally. Lucy answered with authority, clearly enjoying her role as guide. The creek ran through a small valley below the cabin, its surface frozen in ripples and swirls. Snow-covered pines crowded both banks. Lucy pointed out landmarks. The pool where trout gathered in summer. The flat rock where she and Clara used to watch for deer. The lightning-struck pine that marked the property boundary. Jesse took it all in with wonder, turning slowly to see everything, like he was trying to memorize the landscape. "It's real pretty," he said finally. "Prettiest place I ever seen." "You can see it every day if you live here," Lucy said, then looked guilty. "I mean if you stayed, I'm sorry. I know Papa hasn't decided." "It's okay." Jesse managed a small smile. "I understand." But Caleb, watching from a distance, saw the longing in the boy's face as he gazed around at the valley. At the cabin visible through the trees. At Lucy beside him. Jesse wanted this. Wanted it with desperate intensity he was trying hard to hide. Safety. Warmth. A place to belong. Simple things every child deserved. Things this child had been denied. And Caleb realized, standing there in the cold with his breath misting in the air, that he'd already made his decision. Maybe he'd made it last night in the market. Or this morning watching Jesse sleep. Or just now, seeing the boy's face light up at the thought of learning to ride. The exact moment didn't matter. What mattered was this: sending Jesse back to town, to institutions or indifferent authorities or worse, felt wrong in a way Caleb couldn't ignore. This boy had been thrown away by people who should have protected him. Caleb couldn't do the same thing. He thought of Josiah, all the ways he'd failed to keep his brother safe. He thought of Clara, who would have taken Jesse in without a second's hesitation. He thought of Lucy, who'd looked at a suffering child and asked the simplest question in the world. "Can we help him?" The decision settled over him like snow. Quiet. Inevitable. He walked down to where the children stood by the creek. They turned to look at him, both of them, and the hope on their faces was almost painful. "Jesse," Caleb's voice came out rough. "I want to ask you something. Need you to answer honest." The boy's shoulders tensed. "Yes, sir." "If you could choose, if you had somewhere safe to live, food to eat, a warm bed every night, would you want that?" Jesse's throat worked. "Yes, sir." "And if that place was here, with us?" The boy went very still. Lucy grabbed Caleb's hand, squeezing hard. "I ain't gonna be trouble." Jesse's words came out in a rush. "I'll work hard. I'll do whatever you need. I won't eat much, and I can sleep in the barn, and—" "That ain't what I asked." Caleb crouched down so they were eye level. "I asked if you'd want to stay. Not because you'd work for it or earn it. Just stay. Be part of this family." Jesse's eyes went bright with tears he was fighting hard not to shed. "Why would you do that?" His voice cracked. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you're a good kid who got dealt a bad hand. I know you deserve better than what you've gotten." Caleb's voice roughened. "And I know what it's like to lose people, to be alone. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, least of all a child. But I'm nobody. I'm just... You ain't nobody. Lucy's voice cut in fierce as fire. You're Jesse, and we want you here. Tears spilled down the boy's cheeks. He scrubbed at them with his sleeve, looking embarrassed. I can't. You don't have to decide right now, Caleb said gently. But the offer stands. You can stay here with us, long as you want. No conditions, no expectations, except that you'll be safe and cared for. That's it. Jesse stood there shaking, tears running freely now. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, I want to stay, please. I want it so bad. Lucy threw her arms around him. Jesse stiffened for a moment, then hugged her back with desperate strength, his thin shoulders heaving. All the fear and loneliness and pain he'd been holding back came pouring out. Caleb put a hand on the boy's shoulder, felt him shudder. It's all right, he said quietly. You're home now. You're safe. They stood there by the frozen creek, the three of them, until Jesse's tears finally slowed. When he pulled back from Lucy, his face was blotchy and his eyes were red. But something had eased in his expression. Some terrible tension finally released. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you. Caleb nodded, not trusting his own voice. They walked back to the cabin together, Lucy chattering about all the things she'd show Jesse, all the adventures they'd have. Jesse listening with a smile that was growing steadier, more real. Inside, Caleb built up the fire and made tea. They sat around the table warming their hands on the cups, and for the first time since Clara's death, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. But even as relief settled over him, Caleb felt a whisper of unease. He'd made a promise to this boy, taken on a responsibility he wasn't sure he could fulfill. And somewhere in the back of his mind a question nagged. What if he failed again? What if his protection wasn't enough? He pushed the thought away. He'd made his choice. Now he'd live with it. And do everything in his power to make sure Jesse knew he was wanted, valued, safe, even if it meant facing down whatever came next. The unease Caleb felt that morning by the creek proved prophetic, though not in ways he could have anticipated. The first week passed quietly enough. Jesse settled into the rhythms of mountain life with a careful eagerness that spoke to how much this chance meant to him. He learned to feed the chickens without spooking them, carry water without sloshing, split kindling with strokes that grew more confident each day. Lucy appointed herself his teacher in everything. Letters traced in flour on the table, animal tracks identified in the snow, the names of every star visible from the cabin porch. Caleb watched them together and felt something in his chest that was equal parts warmth and terror. The boy was becoming real to them, woven into the fabric of their daily life. And with each passing day, the thought of losing him grew more unbearable. On the 8th morning that fear took shape, Caleb was in the barn mucking out Bess's stall when he heard horses approaching. Multiple riders, moving at a steady pace up the trail. He set down his pitchfork, stepped outside, shaded his eyes against the winter sun. 3 men on horseback emerged from the tree line, their breath and their horse's breath creating clouds of mist in the cold air. The lead rider was tall and heavy-set, dark coat, hat pulled low. The 2 behind him were younger, harder-looking, the kind of casual menace that came from men who enjoyed having power over others. All 3 wore gun belts. Caleb's hand went instinctively to his own hip where his Colt rested. He walked toward them slowly, positioning himself between the riders and the cabin. "Help you, gentlemen," he called when they were close enough. The lead rider reined in his horse 10 feet away. Up close, his face was weathered and hard, eyes like chips of flint. "Name's Silas Gentry. I'm here on behalf of Black Rock Mining." Caleb's jaw tightened. "You're a long way from Silver Ridge." "Looking for something that belongs to the company." Gentry's gaze moved past Caleb to the cabin. A boy, about 10-11 years old, dark hair, answers to Jesse. "What makes you think he's here?" "Word travels." Gentry's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Someone in town mentioned you picked up a street kid at the market last week, Brought him home. He leaned forward in his saddle. That sound familiar? Might. What's your interest in the boy? Company property. Gentry said it like he was discussing livestock. His parents died owing the company money, room and board equipment costs, the usual. Boy worked off some of the debt but ran before it was settled. We're here to collect what's owed. He's a child, not property. Law says different. Gentry shifted in his saddle. His parents' debt passes to him. He works it off or he faces consequences. His voice hardened. Now, you gonna bring him out or do we need to go in and get him? Behind Caleb. The cabin door opened. He didn't turn around. Stay inside, both of you. But Jesse's voice came from the porch. It's all right, Mr. Caleb. Caleb spun. The boy stood on the porch steps, face pale but set with determination. Lucy was right behind him, her hand clutched in his. I knew they'd come eventually. Gentry's eyes lit up with satisfaction. There you are, smart boy. Showing yourself saves us all some trouble. Jesse walked forward, Lucy still holding his hand. I don't owe you nothing. The boy's voice was steady, despite the fear Caleb could see in his eyes. I worked in that mine till I couldn't breathe no more. You got your money's worth. That ain't for you to decide. Gentry gestured to his men. The company has records. Records say you owe another 6 months minimum. He jerked his chin at the two younger men. Get him on a horse. We're wasting daylight. The two riders dismounted. Caleb stepped in front of Jesse. His hand rested openly on his gun. Nobody's taking this boy anywhere. Gentry's expression hardened. You're interfering with company business. That's a crime. So is child labor. So is debt bondage. So is throwing a sick child out to die, and then claiming he still owes you money. Caleb's voice went cold as mountain ice. You want to talk about crimes, we can talk all day, but you ain't taking him. One of the younger men laughed, stringy fellow with a scar across his cheek. You think you're gonna stop all three of us, old man? I think you're gonna find out if you take another step. The tension stretched taut as wire. Gentry studied Caleb with the calculating look of someone assessing an opponent. Weighing odds. Behind Caleb he could hear Lucy's frightened breathing. Feel Jesse trembling beside him. Finally Gentry spoke. You know what you're doing here? You're making an enemy of Black Rock mining. That ain't a smart move in this territory. Don't much care about smart right now. I care about that boy staying where he belongs. And where's that? Gentry's tone turned mocking. With you. What are you, his father now? You adopt every stray that wanders onto your property. If that's what it takes. Something flickered across Gentry's face. Surprise, maybe. Or recalculation. He leaned back in his saddle. The law's on our side. We'll be back with the sheriff. And when we come, you'll hand that boy over or face charges. Then I guess I'll see you when you come back. Caleb didn't move. Didn't blink. But you're leaving now. Empty-handed. For a long moment nobody moved. Then Gentry jerked his chin at his men. They remounted. But the one with the scar spit in the snow near Caleb's feet as he did. This ain't over, Gentry said. Never thought it was. The three men turned their horses and rode back down the trail, disappeared into the trees. Caleb stood watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely, then let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He turned to find Jesse staring at him with wide eyes. You shouldn't have done that. The boy's voice shook. They'll come back. They'll make trouble for you. Let them try. You don't understand. Jesse grabbed Caleb's arm. The company owns half the territory. They got influence, money, the law on their side. And I got a rifle, a good defensive position, and a stubborn streak a mile wide. Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder. I told you you're safe here. I meant it. But why? Jesse's voice cracked. Why would you fight them for me? I ain't worth all this trouble. Caleb crouched down so they were eye level. You listen to me. You're worth every bit of trouble and more. Don't you ever let anyone tell you different. He gripped Jesse's shoulders. Those men don't get to decide what you're worth. The company don't get to decide. Only you get to decide that. You understand me?" Jesse's eyes filled with tears. He nodded, unable to speak. Lucy grabbed both of them in a fierce hug. "They're bad men, Papa. Real bad." "I know, honey. Are they gonna take Jesse away?" "No." Caleb's voice was steel. "They ain't taking anyone. But we need to be smart about this. Come on, inside. We got planning to do." In the cabin, Caleb built up the fire and made coffee while the children sat at the table. Jesse still pale and shaken. When Caleb sat down across from them, he could see the defeat in the boy's eyes. "I should go," Jesse said quietly. "I should leave before they come back. If I ain't here, they can't cause you trouble." "And go where? Back to the streets? Back to sleeping under bridges?" Caleb shook his head. "That ain't happening." "But Mr. Gentry's right. The company's got lawyers. The sheriff." "The sheriff's a decent man. I've known Tom Brennan for years. He won't take a child from a good home to send him back to the mines." "You don't know that." "No, I don't." Caleb leaned forward. "But I'm willing to bet on it. Listen to me, Jesse. I've been where you are. Not exactly the same, but close enough." He paused, the old pain sharp in his chest. "When my brother died, people told me it was my fault, that I should have done more, been better. I let them convince me they were right. I ran from it instead of standing and fighting." Jesse looked up. "Your brother?" "Josiah. He was 14, fell off a cliff in these mountains." Caleb's voice roughened. "I was supposed to be watching him. I was 18, old enough to be responsible, people said. Old enough to have kept him safe. That wasn't your fault. Took me 20 years to believe that. And some days I still don't." Caleb met the boy's eyes. "Point is, I won't run again. And I won't let them take you without a fight. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Jesse's hands clenched on the table. "What if trust ain't enough? What if they come with a dozen men next time? Then we deal with a dozen men." "How?" Fair question. One Caleb had been asking himself. He stood and went to the window, looked out at the trail where Gentry and his men had disappeared. "We make sure we got the law on our side. We make sure everyone knows what's happening here. And we prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." "That ain't a plan." Jesse's voice was flat. "That's just hoping." Caleb turned back. "You're right. So here's the actual plan." He sat down again. "Tomorrow I ride to town. I talk to the sheriff, explain the situation, see where he stands. I also talk to Agnes at the market. She knows everyone. Word spreads fast through her." He paused. "We make sure people know what BlackRock Mining is trying to do. Public opinion won't stop them, but it'll make it harder for them to act quiet. And if that don't work, then we got other options." Caleb's jaw set. "Legal ones." He went to the corner and retrieved his rifle. A Winchester repeater, well-maintained and reliable. Set it on the table between them. "This is a tool, same as an axe or hammer, only dangerous if you don't know how to use it proper." He looked at both children. "I'm going to teach you both how to shoot, not because I want you to have to use it, but because I want you able to protect yourselves if I ain't here." Lucy's eyes went wide. "Really? Really? And I'm going to teach you both what to do if strangers come when I'm gone, where to hide, how to stay quiet, when to run." He met Jesse's gaze. "I won't let them take you, but you need to know how to fight for yourself too." Some of the defeat faded from Jesse's expression, replaced by something harder, more determined. "Okay." His voice steadied. "I'll learn. I'll do whatever it takes." They spent the rest of that day on preparation. Caleb showed them the rifle, how to load and unload, how to aim and fire. He took them outside and set up targets, old cans and pieces of wood, and let them practice. Lucy was better than he expected. Her small hands steady. Jesse was shakier at first, But he learned fast. His jaw set with concentration. Between shooting lessons, Caleb taught them the cabin's defenses. The bar that dropped across the door. The window shutters that latched from inside. The loose board in the loft that led to a crawl space where they could hide. He showed them the back trail that led down to the creek and up over the ridge. An escape route if they needed it. "You remember all that?" he asked when the sun was setting. Both children nodded. Lucy looked scared but determined. Jesse looked older than his years, like he'd accepted the weight of what might come. That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb sat by the fire cleaning his rifle. The metal was cold and heavy in his hands, familiar and terrible. He'd killed men with this weapon, years ago in a war that felt like another lifetime. He'd sworn afterward that he was done with violence, that he'd build a quiet life far from such things. But here he was, preparing for a fight to protect a boy he'd known for barely more than a week. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt right, clear. For the first time since Clara's death, Caleb felt like he knew exactly what he was supposed to be doing. At dawn, he saddled Bess and prepared to ride to town. Jesse and Lucy stood on the porch watching him, both bundled against the cold. "I'll be back before dark," Caleb promised. "Remember what I taught you." "We remember," Lucy said. Jesse just nodded, his face serious. Caleb rode down the trail with the sun rising behind him, turning the snow to gold. The ride to town took 3 hours. He spent them thinking through every possible outcome, every argument he might need to make. Silver Creek was busier than it had been on market day, wagons loading supplies. Men gathered outside the saloon despite the early hour. Caleb tied Bess outside the sheriff's office and went inside. Tom Brennan was a solid man in his 50s, gray hair, weathered face that had seen most everything the frontier had to offer. He looked up from his desk when Caleb entered. Expression cautious. "Caleb Thornton. Wasn't expecting you." "Need to talk, Tom. It's important." Brennan gestured to a chair. "Figured you might. Heard Silas Gentry rode out your way yesterday." "News travels fast." "Always does." Brennan leaned back. "He came to see me this morning. Said you're harboring a boy who owes BlackRock mining money. Said he wants me to ride out there with a warrant." Caleb's jaw tightened. "And are you?" "That depends." Brennan studied him. "Tell me your side." So Caleb did. He explained finding Jesse in the market, the boy's history, the abuse he'd suffered at the mine. He explained Gentry's visit, the threats, the claim of debt that was nothing more than exploitation dressed up as legality. When he finished, Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Hell, Caleb, you've put me in a bad spot." "How so?" "Because technically Gentry's right." Brennan held up a hand when Caleb started to protest. "The law says a child can inherit their parents' debts. And if the company has documentation that the boy's parents owed them money, then legally, they can force a child into servitude." Caleb's voice went hard. "Tom, you can't be serious. I'm telling you what the law says, not what I think is right." Brennan rubbed his face. "But here's the thing. BlackRock Mining's been leaning on people in this territory for years. They got judges in their pocket, politicians on their payroll. If I go against them without solid ground to stand on, they'll have me removed. Put someone in this office who will do what they want." "So you're just going to hand Jesse over?" "I didn't say that." Brennan stood, went to the window. "I'm saying we need to be smart. If you want to keep that boy, we need to find a legal way to do it. Something that'll stand up even if the company pushes back." "Like what?" Brennan turned. "Adoption. If you formally adopt Jesse, make him your legal son, then the debt becomes void. Can't force a man's child into servitude to pay his dead parents' debts. That's been settled law since Reconstruction." Hope flared in Caleb's chest. "How fast can we do that?" "Normally few weeks, maybe a month with all the paperwork and court approvals." "I don't have a month." "I know." Brennan grabbed his coat. But I might be able to speed it up. Judge Aldridge owes me a favor, and he's got no love for the mining companies." He headed for the door. "Come on, let's go talk to him now." They found Judge Harrison Aldridge in his chambers, a thin man with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. He listened to their story without interruption, fingers steepled under his chin. When they finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're asking me to process an adoption in record time to circumvent what is, however distasteful, a legal debt claim." "I'm asking you to protect a child from exploitation," Caleb said. "Same thing, different words." Aldridge leaned back. "I appreciate honesty, Mr. Thornton. Let me be honest in return." He stood, walked to his bookshelf. "I've watched BlackRock Mining operate in this territory for 5 years, seen them treat workers like disposable machinery, seen them ruin lives for profit, seen them use the law as a weapon against anyone who stands in their way." He turned back. "I've also been waiting for someone to stand up to them, someone with the backbone to fight, and the sense to do it legally." His eyes met Caleb's. That someone... I'm a man trying to protect a boy who deserves better than what he's gotten. If that means standing up to a mining company, then yes." Aldridge smiled, a thin, sharp expression. "Then I'll help you. But understand this." He stepped closer. "Once we start this process, there's no backing out. You'll be adopting this child legally and completely. He'll be your son in every way that matters. Can you commit to that?" Caleb thought of Jesse's face when he'd asked if he could stay. Thought of the boy's determination to learn, to work, to be worthy of the kindness being shown to him. Thought of how the cabin felt less empty with him there, how Lucy had blossomed having someone to care for. "Yes," he said. "I can commit to that." "Then we begin immediately." Aldridge pulled out paper and began writing. "I'll need you to fill out documentation, and I'll need the boy here to confirm his consent. Can you bring him tomorrow?" "I can." "Good." Aldridge finished writing and signed with a flourish, stamped it with his seal. "In the meantime, I'm issuing a temporary protective order. This states that Jesse is under the jurisdiction of this court, pending adoption proceedings. He cannot be removed from your custody without my express approval." He handed the document to Caleb. "It's not permanent, but it'll hold them off for now. Show this to anyone who comes asking, including Gentry. If he's smart, he'll back off until the legal process plays out. And if he ain't smart," Aldridge's expression hardened, "then he'll be in contempt of court, and I'll have the sheriff arrest him." He stood taller. "I may not be able to take on the whole company, but I can sure make life difficult for one arrogant foreman." Caleb took the document, relief washing through him. "Thank you, Judge." "Don't thank me yet. We got a fight ahead." Aldridge's eyes met his. "But I'll tell you this. I'm glad someone's finally standing up. That boy's lucky to have found you." "I think I'm the lucky one," Caleb said quietly. He left the judge's chambers and went straight to the market. Agnes was at her usual spot selling meat pies. When she saw Caleb, her expression shifted from friendly to concerned. "Heard you had visitors yesterday," she said without preamble. "Word does travel." "Silas Gentry's been around town asking questions, stirring up trouble." She handed him a meat pie without asking if he wanted one. "That boy you helped, he doing all right?" "He is, and I'm fighting to keep it that way." Caleb lowered his voice. "Agnes, I need your help. I need people to know what's happening, what the company's trying to do." Agnes's eyes sharpened. "What exactly are they trying to do?" Caleb told her. When he finished, her face had gone hard as stone. "That's slavery dressed up in legal terms. No child should be treated that way." "I agree, but I need support. If this goes public..." "They'll know by sunset," Agnes promised. "I'll make sure of it." She gripped his arm. "And Caleb, most folks around here got no love for BlackRock Mining. You'll have more support than you think." She was right. By the time Caleb rode out of town 2 hours later, he'd been stopped half a dozen times by people expressing support, offering help, sharing their own stories of the company's cruelty. A rancher offered his barn if Caleb needed a safe place. The preacher promised to speak on the issue come Sunday. Even the banker pulled him aside and said quietly that he'd be willing to testify about the company's questionable financial practices if needed. Caleb rode home with Aldridge's protective order in his coat and a small seed of hope growing in his chest. It wasn't over, far from it. But for the first time he felt like they might actually have a chance. He reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and red. Jesse and Lucy ran out to meet him, both talking at once, asking questions. He dismounted and showed them the document. "What's it mean?" Jesse asked, struggling with the legal language. "It means you're staying, officially, legally." Caleb crouched down. "At least until the adoption goes through." Jesse's eyes widened. "Adoption. If you want it. If you want to be my son. Not just someone staying in my barn." Caleb's voice roughened. "It's your choice, Jesse. But I'm offering, if you'll have it." The boy's throat